long before the first Viking ship touched the misty waters of the North Sea, before men carved runes into stone or whispered prayers to Odin. There was only silence and endless, frozen void where time itself seemed asleep. The old poets called it Ginnungop, the yawning gap, a place between fire and frost where creation waited in secret. If you close your eyes now, you might almost hear it, the cracking of ancient ice, the hiss of unseen flames, and beneath it all, a deep, humming sound, like the heartbeat of the universe waiting to begin. Sit back, relax, and let the darkness of the past unfold. From the edge of nothingness, worlds were born not from peace, but from tension where Muspelheim, the realm of fire, clashed against Niflheim, the realm of mist. When their forces met, droplets formed in the void, and from them came life. The frost giant, vast and heavy, his breath cold as eternity. From his melting body dripped rivers and mountains, while beside him stirred a cosmic cow named Authumla, who licked the salty ice until a figure emerged, Buri, ancestor of the gods. It's strange to imagine that all of existence, from stars to storms, began with ice and milk. But in the Norse mind, creation was never clean or kind. It was survival against chaos. From Ymir's sleeping limbs, the first gods shaped the world. They carved the mountains from his bones, oceans from his blood, and clouds from his brain. His skull became the dome of the heavens, and sparks from Muspelheim became the stars. Yet beneath that beauty, there was always something unsettling. The gods had built their world upon a corpse. They lived in splendor above Midgard, but the memory of Ymir's death lingered like frost on their skin. Perhaps that is why, in every Norse tale, even joy carries the scent of decay. Because from the very beginning, creation and destruction were twins bound together like ice and fire, life and doom. And as the winds began to stir across the newborn world, the Norn's three shadowed sisters approached the roots of a great tree, whispering the first threads of fate that no god, no man, could ever escape. At the center of everything stood a tree so vast its branches could cradle worlds, and its roots reached places even light dared not go. The Norse called it Yggdrasil, the world tree, a living pillar holding up the heavens and binding together realms that pulsed with their own strange energies. Close your eyes and imagine its roots as thick as rivers, glowing softly with runes older than speech, branches stretching into a sky woven with stars that flickered like ancient eyes. It was said that 9 worlds hung from Yggdrasil's limbs like ornaments of destiny: Asgard, home of the gods; Midgard, the realm of men; and far darker places like Helheim, where shadows drifted in the cold. Beneath those roots, 3 wells flowed each, whispering a different truth. One was the Well of Fate, where the Norns, the weavers of destiny, sat day and night, carving the future into bark and stone. Some believed they shaped even the gods' lives, and that Odin himself feared what they saw. Another well was the source of wisdom, guarded by Mimir, whose severed head still spoke secrets to those who dared to listen. And the third well, black and endless, drank the poison that dripped from Nidhogg, the serpent gnawing endlessly at Yggdrasil's roots. Between these places stretched a web of creatures: eagles in the branches, stags that fed on leaves, and the mischievous squirrel that carried insults from the serpent below to the eagle above, keeping the universe alive with conflict. Some storytellers say the gods would gather at the base of Yggdrasil every day, their laughter echoing like thunder through the roots, unaware, or perhaps pretending not to know, that the tree was dying slowly from within. Its bark wept sap that smelled faintly of ash and time. its leaves trembling even when the air was still. Some scholars think this symbolizes decay, the idea that even in the heart of creation, entropy rules. Others suggest Yggdrasil was a bridge between chaos and order, between what was and what would be. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: the gods were not its masters. They were part of its breath, bound as tightly as men and monsters. And as Odin gazed upon its towering form, he must have known every secret the tree held would demand a price. No god could bear to pay. Before the gods walked the shining halls of Asgard, before the 9 worlds found their shape, there was only a churning void called Ginnungagap. On one side lay Niflheim, the realm of frost and eternal shadow, where rivers of poison froze into jagged cliffs of ice. On the other side burned Muspelheim, a land of flame and chaos ruled by the fire giant Surtur, whose sword could end worlds. Between them stretched the yawning emptiness, silent except for the sound of ice cracking under unseen pressure. Then, slowly, warmth met cold, and from that meeting came the first stirrings of life. Melting frost dripped into the gap, and where fire kissed ice, something impossible formed a giant named Ymir, the ancestor of all giants. His breath was mist, his sweat became rivers, and from his armpits, strange beings were born. Vast and formless, their laughter echoing through the emptiness. As Ymir slept, a cow named Autumla emerged from the melting frost, pure and white, licking the salt from ice blocks to feed herself. From those blocks came the first Godbury, bright and strong, the father of a new race. Bori's son, Bor, would take a giantess as his mate, and from their union came Odin, Vili, and Vi, the first true gods, beings of thought, will, and sacred speech. They watched Ymir, immense and chaotic, and saw in him both creation and corruption. Some stories say Ymir fed on his own offspring, his hunger unending. Others claim his body was the cosmos itself, waiting to be reshaped. The brothers chose the latter path. They rose against him, their power echoing like thunder in the void. And when Ymir fell, his blood became the seas, his bones the mountains, his skull the sky. From his eyebrows they shaped Midgard, the realm of men, and from his brain the clouds. Ymir's death was the first act of order, the first triumph of divine will over chaos. Yet even as the gods stood over their creation, the blood of the slain giant continued to flow, filling the world with the seeds of his kindred, the frost giants, who would forever despise the gods who murdered their father. From that moment onward, creation carried within it a curse, a whisper that everything made from death would one day return to it. When the brothers Odin, Vili and Vi looked upon the body of the slain Ymir, they saw in his remains not ruin but potential. His flesh became the soil beneath their feet, soft and fertile. His bones rose into mountains crowned with snow. His blood surged outward and filled the depths, forming the oceans that would cradle the future. They took his skull and placed it high above, shaping the dome of the sky, setting sparks from Muspelheim within it to shine as stars. His eyebrows they bent into a protective wall encircling the realm of Menna, barrier between order and the frostbitten chaos beyond. From this divine act of shaping emerged the 9 worlds, each bound to the next through Yggdrasil's roots and branches. At the highest sat Asgard, realm of the gods, gleaming with halls of gold and stone, where Odin's throne allowed him to gaze upon all creation. Below it lay Midgard, the home of men, surrounded by seas and guarded by that ancient Brual. Further still, beneath the roots of the world tree, stretched Helheim, a cold and silent place where those who died without glory wandered in shadows. Other worlds hung like distant lanterns Vanaheim, home of the wise and peaceful Vanir gods. Alfheim, where radiant elves walked in endless twilight. Svartalfheim, the caverns of dwarves whose forges glowed hotter than the sun. And Jotunheim, the untamed wilderness of giants and storms. Each realm mirrored the others in strange harmony. Creation balanced precariously between beauty and doom. The gods set in motion the cycles of night and day, calling upon Sol and Moni, the sun and moon, to ride their celestial paths. But even as they established order, they sensed the chaos still whispering from Ymir's blood. Some say Odin built the world as both a gift and a cage of fragile defense against the darkness that had once ruled the void. The air itself hummed with tension, as if the elements remembered their violent birth. And deep within the roots of Yggdrasil, the serpent Nidhogg stirred, gnawing at the foundation of this new cosmos, ensuring that even in the moment of creation, the seeds of destruction were already taking root. From the calm shores of the newly shaped Midgard, where the sea lapped gently against the bones of Ymir, Odin and his brothers walked in silence. The world they had forged was vast and filled with promise, yet it lacked something, a heartbeat, a reflection of thought. They moved along the sands until they came upon two pieces of driftwood, lifeless and pale, worn smooth by the waves. Odin knelt and looked upon them, and in that moment he saw what could be. With his breath he gave them life. His brothers followed Vili, granted them reason and emotion, and Vi bestowed upon them form and senses. Thus were born Ask and Embla, the first humans, man and woman, fragile yet filled with a spark unlike anything the gods had seen before. They stood trembling at first, confused by the wind and the waves, blinking into the golden light of a newborn sun. Odin watched with an expression that might have been pride or, perhaps, curiosity, for these new beings were neither gods nor beasts, but something in between, carrying both divinity and mortality in their veins. The brothers placed them in Midgard, encircling them with the brawl wall taken from Ymir's remains, protecting them from the wild forces that still prowled the edges of creation. The gods gifted them language to name the world and memory to pass down its stories. It was said that from the rhythm of their hearts, time itself began to move forward, marking the first true dawn. Some whisper that Odin saw in these fragile creatures the reflection of the gods, own fate a reminder that even immortals could fall. Others claim the creation of man was an act of defiance against chaos, a declaration that meaning could exist even in a world built on death. Yet from that day, the balance of the worlds shifted. Where once the gods ruled alone, there now stood beings who could dream, hope, and rebel. Ask and Embla built their dwellings beside the forests, raised children who would forget their divine origins, and lived under the watch of unseen eyes from above. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, the giants stirred again, sensing that something new had been born, something small, but powerful enough to alter the fate of all the realms. High above the mortal plains, in a realm shimmering with gold and light, the gods built their home. It began not as a fortress, but as a promise, a gleaming seat of order amid the chaos that still lurked in the shadows of the universe. The Aesir gods, led by Odin, raised halls that defied gravity and reason, suspended between the stars and the clouds. The most majestic among them was Valhalla, its roof made of golden shields, its walls lined with spears, and its gates wide enough to welcome an army of heroes. The clang of hammers rang across the heavens as dwarves forged weapons, jewelry, and artifacts infused with divine power. Yet, behind the beauty of Asgard lay a deep, unsayed knowledge that perfection, once achieved, could only decay. Odin walked among the halls, one eye gleaming, the other lost to wisdom he had purchased from Mimir's well. He saw the future not as a straight road, but as a cycle of birth, growth, and ruin. The gods built Bifrost, the shimmering rainbow bridge that connected their realm to Midgard, a bridge said to hum with the breath of the cosmos. It became their lifeline, their path between worlds, guarded by Heimdall, the watchman whose hearing could catch the sound of grass growing or wool bending in the wind. Beneath Asgard's beauty, alliances were forged with the Vanir gods deities of fertility, wisdom, and magic. Their union brought peace, but also tension, for both clans saw themselves as rightful rulers of the cosmos. To keep harmony, they exchanged hostages, binding oaths in golden halls, while mistrust lingered behind smiles. The gods feasted in endless twilight, their laughter echoing across the sky. But always in Odin's mind flickered the image of a wolf massive patient, waiting. For even then, the prophecies had begun. The seers whispered of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, and Odin, ever restless, began his quest for knowledge, wandering through realms, trading pieces of himself for secrets that could delay the inevitable. And though Asgard stood radiant above the world, its brilliance was already touched by shadow, a perfect kingdom built upon the bones of giants, destined to burn in the fire from which it once rose. There are stories that speak of gods as all-knowing, but in Norse myth, even the Allfather had to earn his sight. Odin's hunger for understanding was not born of curiosity, was born of dread. He had glimpsed fragments of the future, threads of a great unraveling, and he knew that knowledge was both his only weapon and his greatest torment. So he sought wisdom wherever it hid, even if it meant suffering beyond measure. His first sacrifice was his eye. He travelled to Mimir's well, hidden beneath one of Yggdrasil's roots, where the water shimmered with memory itself. Mimir, the guardian of the well, demanded a price that no other god would dare pay. Without hesitation, Odin plucked out one of his eyes and cast it into the dark waters, watching as ripples swallowed his reflection. When he drank from the well, visions flooded his mind, images of gods and giants, of fire and ash, of the world ending and beginning again. His remaining eye saw the present. The one beneath the surface saw eternity, but still, it wasn't enough. The knowledge he gained came with an emptiness that could not be filled. To truly understand the runes, the hidden language of existence, he turned to the world tree itself. Odin hung from Yggdrasil for 9 nights and 9 days, pierced by his own spear, without food or water, drifting between life and death. The wind tore at him, the roots whispered secrets, and the stars spun like cold eyes above. On the 9th night, when the boundary between the living and the dead dissolved, he saw the runes glowing in the void and reached out. In that moment, he fell not to the ground, but into awareness. He understood that wisdom was not light but shadow, not peace but burden. When he returned to Asgard, pale and hollow-eyed, he carried in his voice the weight of what he had seen. Some gods whispered that he was no longer entirely one of them. That part of him belonged to the tree, to the well, to the void itself. From that day, Odin became the wanderer, the seeker of truths others feared to ask. And though his knowledge grew vast, the fear never left him. He had seen the end, and he knew that every step toward wisdom was also a step toward doom. In a world governed by laws and prophecy, chaos always finds its way in, and in Asgard, chaos had a name, Loki. No one could truly say where he came from. Some said he was born of giants, a child of frost and flame. Others whispered that he emerged from the shadows between worlds. Yet Odin, ever drawn to mystery, made him his blood brother, binding him to the Aesir by oath. Loki's face could shift like smoke handsome one moment, cruel the next, and his tongue was sharper than any blade forged by He brought laughter to the golden halls, but also unease, for his humor always danced close to ruin. The gods tolerated his pranks, for he could charm even Frigg with clever words and solve problems no one else dared touch. He was both companion and serpent, a creature who delighted in exposing the cracks beneath perfection. It was Loki who helped the gods build their walls, who tricked dwarves into forging treasures, the hammer, Melnir, Odin's spear, Gungnir, and Freya's shining necklace. But every gift came with a curse, and every act of generosity carried a debt. Loki was not evil, not yet. He was simply untamed, the necessary balance to Asgard's order. Still, there were moments when the mask slipped. He would stare too long into the flames, as if remembering something from before creation, and in those moments his eyes carried the cold of Jotunheim. Some said the blood of giants still whispered in him, calling him home, and though he shared wine with Thor and traded riddles with Odin, he was never fully trusted. Even the gods sensed that one day the trickster's laughter would echo in their downfall. Loki himself seemed to know it. Perhaps that was why he smiled so icily, because he had already accepted the part fate had written for him. Yet beneath the mischief lay a deeper sorrow. He was the god who could belong nowhere, too clever for loyalty, too restless for peace. When night fell over Asgard and the halls grew quiet, Loki would walk the rainbow bridge alone, staring into the vastness below, where the worlds shimmered like dying embers. Somewhere in that darkness, the shape of his destiny waited, patient and smiling, just like him. There came a time when Asgard, proud and golden, sought to arm itself with wonders unlike any ever seen. It began, as many things in Norse myth do, with Loki's mischief. One day, in a fit of arrogance, he cut off the shining hair of Sif Thor's beloved wife, whose golden locks were said to gleam like fields of wheat in the sun. Thor's rage shook the heavens, and Loki, desperate to save himself, promised to replace the hair with something finer. To do this, he journeyed to Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves, where the master smiths worked deep beneath the earth in forges hot enough to melt stars. There he approached the sons of Ivaldi, who crafted for him new golden hair that shimmered like living light and would grow naturally upon Sif's head. But Loki, unable to resist temptation, taunted another group of dwarves, the brothers, Sindri and Brock, reclaiming they could never surpass such craftsmanship. Insulted, they accepted his challenge. As sparks flew and hammers rang, the dwarves forged 3 gifts for the gods. First came Gungnir, Odin's spear, which never missed its mark. Then Draupnir, a golden ring that multiplied itself every 9th night. And finally, Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, born of thunder and forged with the strength to crush mountains. Loki tried to sabotage the work by turning into a fly and biting Brokka's hand as he worked the bellows. But the smith did not falter, though the hammer's handle came out shorter than planned. When the treasures were brought before the gods, Odin judged the contest, and though all gifts were divine, Mjolnir's power to protect Asgard made it the greatest. The gods laughed and praised the dwarves, and Thor forgave Loki at least for a time. But beneath the celebration, the lesson lingered. Every act of creation demanded a spark of destruction. Loki's wager had brought the gods their mightiest weapons, yet it had also tied their fates to his cunning. For each treasure carried within it a whisper of imperfection, a flaw that would one day reveal itself. The hammer would save Asgard, but it would also be its witness when the skies burned. The ring would multiply endlessly, a symbol of greed and power's cycle. And the spear that never missed would one day strike the final blow in a war no god could win. As the ages of the gods unfolded, shadows grew beneath Asgard's golden light, and among them, none was darker than the prophecy of Loki's children. Born of the trickster and the giantess Angrboda were three beings destined to bring about ruin: Jormungandr, the world serpent cast into the ocean; Hel, the half-living queen of the dead; and Fenrir, the monstrous wolf whose jaws could swallow the sun. Odin, ever haunted by visions of Ragnarok, foresaw that Fenrir would one day devour him, and so he sought to bind the beast before that fate could unfold. At first, the gods approached Fenrir with cautious deceit, wrapping their intentions in laughter and games. They forged two massive chains, Lyding and Drami, and invited the wolf to test his strength by breaking them. Fenrir, proud and fearless, agreed, snapping each chain like thread beneath his monstrous paws. But Odin would not give up. He sent Skirnir to the dwarves of Svartalfheim to forge a binding unlike any before, crafted from the sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird, possible things. Yet the dwarves wove them into a ribbon so soft and smooth it shimmered like silk. They named it Gleip. When the gods returned to Fenrir with this delicate thread, he grew suspicious. "If you mean no harm," he said, "let one of you place their hand in my mouth as a sign of trust." Only the brave god Thor stepped forward, knowing what must follow. As the ribbon tightened, Fenrir struggled, but Gleipnir held firm, the impossible material stronger than any forged iron. The gods laughed in triumph, but Fenrir's roar shattered their joy. In fury and betrayal, he clamped his jaws shut, biting off Thor's hand. The sound echoed through the worlds like thunder beneath the earth. Bound upon a lonely rock, with a sword wedged in his jaws and drool-forming rivers around him, Fenrir lay waiting, his yellow eyes burning with hate and destiny. The gods walked away, but none felt victory. For deep within their hearts, they knew this act had not averted prophesied, had ensured it. One day the bonds would break, and the wolf's howl would be the first sound of the world's end, far from Asgard's shining walls, deep within the misty realms of men and giants. There existed a tale that spoke of how wisdom itself could be stolen, brewed, and consumed. It began in the aftermath of a war between the gods known as the Gyr and the Vanir. When peace was made, both sides sealed their truce by spitting into a great vessel. From that sacred mixture, they formed a being named Kavasarwise, beyond measure, born of divine accord. Kavasar travelled across the realms, spreading knowledge and counsel wherever he went, until one day he met two dwarves, Fala and Galar, whose hearts were as clever as they were cruel. They invited Kavasir to a feast, and there they killed him. From his blood they brewed a mead mixed with honey, creating a potion that granted the drinker poetry, wisdom, and inspiration. They named it Ukraria, the mead of poetry. Word of its power spread quickly, reaching the giant Suttun, who demanded vengeance for his slain kinsman. The dwarves offered him the mead to spare their lives, and Suttun hid it away in a mountain, guarded by his daughter Gunla. But Odin, ever hungry for wisdom, desired it for himself. He journeyed across the worlds, disguising himself as a wanderer named Bolverka, the evil worker, with cunning and charm. He worked for Suttung's brother, Bogi, and convinced him to help drill into the mountain where the mead was kept. Slipping through the hole in the form of a snake, Odin entered the chamber where Gunla stood watch. There he spent 3 nights with her, earning 3 sips of the divine brew. But Odin did not sip, he drank every drop, transforming into an eagle and soaring toward Asgard. Suttung, realizing the theft, gave chase in his own eagle form. The two streaking across the sky like comets of light and shadow. As Odin neared the halls of the gods, the Gyr prepared vessels to catch the mead as he spat it out, dividing divine inspiration among them. Yet a few drops fell to Midgard, granting humankind its rare sparks of genius and art. And so it is said that every poet, every singer, and every storyteller who moves the heart with words is tasting, if only faintly, the mead stolen by Odin from the giants' hoard in the early golden age of the gods, when Asgard still stood open to the threats of the outer worlds. A stranger arrived, offering to build a wall so strong it could withstand any assault from giants or beasts. The gods, weary of endless watchfulness, listened. The builder, tall, quiet, and cloaked in mystery, promised to raise the wall in only 1 winter. But his price was unthinkable. He asked for the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya as payment. Outraged, the gods refused, but Loki, ever the deceiver, persuaded them to accept under one condition, that the builder complete the wall without any help from others. The man agreed, asking only to use his powerful stallion, Svalfari, to haul the stones. The gods consented, believing the task impossible. But as the days passed, they watched in disbelief as the stallion's strength moved mountains, and the wall rose faster than any mortal could have built it. Panic spread among the Gyr as winter waned and the wall neared completion. If the builder succeeded, Asgard would lose its most radiant treasures. The gods turned on Loki, demanding he fix the mistake he had made. So Loki devised a new deception. One night, he transformed himself into a beautiful mare and lured Svalfari away from the worksite. The stallion, bewitched by the mare's beauty, chased Loki deep into the forest, and without his mighty companion, the builder failed to finish the wall. Enraged, the stranger revealed his true form, a giant from Jotunheim, come to claim his reward through deceit. But before he could strike, Thor raised Mjolnir and smashed his skull to dust, ending the threat. The wall remained, half complete, yet strong enough to guard Asgard for ages. Months later, Loki returned, bearing an unexpected consequence of his trickery, a strange, grey, 8-legged foal named Sleipnir. He was swift beyond measure, the finest steed in all the worlds, and Loki gifted him to Odin. Thus, from deceit and desire came Asgard's greatest guardian, both in wall and in steed. The gods learned that bargains, no matter how clever, always carry a shadow. The wall kept their enemies at bay, but the tale whispered of a truth older than stone. Every fortress built from fear becomes a prison in time, and every debt born of trickery must one day be paid. There was no treasure in Asgard more precious than the apples of Idun, for they were the secret of the gods' immortality. Without them, even Odin and Thor would wither and age, and the gleaming halls of Asgard would fall into dust. Idun, gentle and golden-haired, tended her orchard with care, carrying her apples in a carved wooden box that shimmered with divine light. Yet her innocence made her a perfect target for mischieving Loki, as always, was the thread through which chaos entered. One day, while Loki wandered beyond Asgard, he was captured by the giant Thijazi, who demanded a ransom for his release. The price was Idun and her apples. Loki, fearful for his life, agreed, though the bargain would doom the gods. Upon his return, he lured Idun from the safety of her home, saying he had found apples even more radiant growing just beyond the walls. Trusting him, she followed, carrying her box of fruit. But as they crossed into the forest, Thjazi descended from the sky in the form of a great eagle, his wings blotting out the sun. He seized Idun and carried her away to his icy fortress in Yor. Days passed, and Asgard grew dim. The gods aged, their strength fading, their skin turning pale and grey. Desperation filled the halls until they discovered Loki's treachery. They seized him and threatened him with torment unless he set things right. Terrified, Loki swore to bring her back. Borrowing Freya's falcon cloak, he flew across the skies to Jotunheim, where he found Idun alone, her apples still glowing in the shadows. Using his cunning, Loki transformed her into a nut and carried her away in his talons. When Thjazi returned and found his captive gone, he roared with fury and took flight after them. The chase tore across the heavens, fire trailing from their wings, until Loki neared Asgard's gates. The gods, seeing the flames of pursuit, built a great pyre at the wall. As Loki crossed the threshold, they lit it, and Thjazi's wings caught fire. The giant fell in ashes upon the ground, and Idun was restored. When she offered her apples once more, the gods drank in their golden glow and felt life return to their limbs. But though they laughed and feasted, each of them knew how close they had come to mortality, and how one trickster's promise nearly unmade eternity itself among all the gods. None shone brighter than Balder, son of Odin and Frigg, the embodiment of light, purity, and joy. His very presence brought peace to the hearts of gods and men alike, and it was said that flowers bloomed wherever he walked. Yet beneath this beauty a shadow stirred, for Balder began to dream of his own death. Night after night, visions of darkness and grief haunted him, and when he shared them, the gods were struck with fear, for prophecy in Asgard was never false. Frigg, desperate to save her beloved son, travelled through all the realms, extracting oaths from every creature, every element, every stone and plant, that none would harm Balder. All swore their loyalties save for one small sprig of mistletoe. Too young, Frigg believed, to pose any threat. With this assurance, the gods took comfort and even turned Balder's invulnerability into sport, throwing stones and spears at him as he laughed unharmed. But Loki, watching from the shadows, saw the flaw. Crafting a dart from mistletoe, he approached Balder's blind brother Hrchar, guiding his hand in mock play. "Cast this for honor's sake," he whispered. Hrchar, innocent and trusting, obeyed. The dart flew straight and silent, piercing Balder's heart. The laughter ceased. Light dimmed. The son of Odin fell lifeless, and all of Asgard was struck silent with horror. Frigg's cries echoed through the heavens as Odin's grief turned to rage and despair. The gods built Balder's funeral pyre upon his great ship Hringhorni, and sent him to sea with his wife, Nanna, who died of sorrow beside him. Even the giants wept that day. But Odin's mourning was not idle. He whispered to the corpse of his son, and in return Balder's spirit spoke of the end to come, a warning wrapped in prophecy. Determined to defy fate, the gods sent Hermo to Hel to plead for Balder's return. The queen of the dead agreed, but only if all things in creation wept for him. Every being did save one giantess, believed by many to be Loki in disguise, who refused to shed a tear. And so Balder remained in Hel's realm, bright and sorrowful, awaiting the end of days. From that moment, the golden age of Asgard began to fade, and every god felt it in their heart the world had changed, and the first crack of Ragnarok had begun to sound. After Balder's death, Asgard was no longer the same. The laughter that once filled the golden halls had turned hollow, and the shimmering light of the realm seemed dimmed beneath an unseen shadow. The gods knew the truth. Loki's hand had guided the dart that felled the beloved son of Odin. His cunning, once tolerated for the amusement it brought, had finally crossed into unforgivable treachery. The Aesir hunted him across the 9 realms, and for a time Loki eluded them, shifting form, fleeing through rivers and forests, hiding in the shape of a salmon in the rushing streams. But there is no hiding from divine justice. When Thor cast his net across the waters and caught the trickster in his grasp, Loki's writhing form turned back into that of a man, and his laughter ceased. They dragged him back to Asgard, where Odin's wrath burned with ancient fury. Loki was brought before the council of gods, his crimes recited like a curse. He spat defiance at them all, claiming that the gods themselves were hypocrites, murderers, liars, no less cruel than he. But his words fell on hearts hardened by grief. The punishment was unlike any before it. The gods took Loki to a cavern deep beneath the earth, where no light of the sun could reach. There they seized his sons, transforming one into a wolf that tore the other apart. And from the entrails of the slain child, they forged the bonds that would hold Loki fast. They bound him to 3 stones, his limbs stretched and pinned, while above him a serpent was fixed to the ceiling, dripping venom upon his face. His faithful wife, Sigyn, knelt beside him, holding a bowl to catch the poison, but when she turned to empty it, the venom fell upon his skin, and Loki convulsed with such agony that the earth itself shook. The first of the quakes men would call earthquakes. So he lay there, beneath the world, bound in suffering, waiting for the end that even he knew must come. It was said that his screams echoed through the roots of Yggdrasil, reaching even the halls of hell. Yet in that darkness, his mind burned with vengeance. Loki, father of monsters, would not remain chained forever. The day would come when the bonds would break, the serpent would slip free, and his children, the wolf, the serpent, and the Death Queen would rise to bring ruin upon gods and men alike. Long before Balder's death, the seers of Asgard had whispered of a day when all the worlds would burn, when gods and giants would meet in their final battle beneath a sky split by fire and ice. This prophecy was known as Ragnarök, fate of the gods. Odin had sought its truth in every corner of the cosmos, but each vision, each rune, led to the same grim conclusion. The end could not be stopped, only understood. The Valva, the ancient seeress whom Odin had awakened from her grave, had spoken the words that still haunted him. She told of a bitter winter, Fimbulwinter, that would last for 3 years without sun or warmth, turning brother against brother and plunging mankind into chaos. She spoke of wolves devouring the sun and moon, of stars falling from the heavens, and of the mighty Yggdrasil trembling as the order of all things unraveled. Odin had tried to defy it, gathering warriors, forging alliances, preparing for the storm to come, but prophecy is a river that even the gods cannot dam. And so, as the ages passed and the signs began to appear, the growing unrest among the giants, the fading of the gods' power, the trembling of the earth beneath Loki's chains, the Allfather knew the time was near. He wandered often to the edge of the world, gazing into Mimye's well, seeking one more glimpse of hope. But even the waters of wisdom reflected only the same end. The ravens, Hugin and Munin, flew across the realms, bringing news of war and ruin. The dead stirred uneasily in hell, and the oceans roared with unnatural fury. The prophecy named the enemies clearly: Fenrir, the wolf-child of Loki, who would break free from his bonds and devour Odin himself; Jarmungandr, the world's serpent, who would rise from the sea to poison the sky; and the fire giant Surtur, whose flaming sword would ignite the world. Yet even among this doom, there was a thread of destiny still unbroken. Some said that after the fire and ruin, a new world would rise from the ashes, green and pure, and that Balder would return from hell to guide it. Whether that was truth or a cruel comfort, none could say. For now, the shadow of Ragnarok loomed ever closer, and every creak of Yggdrasil's branches was a reminder that the end of all things was already set in motion. The silence before Ragnarok was deceptive, heavy with the stillness that comes before a storm. Beneath the earth, in the cavern of torment, the venom of the serpent continued to fall upon Loki's face, each drop searing his flesh and echoing through the bones of the world. But one day, the trembling that followed his convulsions did not fade, it deepened, spreading like a pulse through the roots of Yggdrasil. The bonds that had held him for ages, forged from the entrails of his own son, began to strain and twist. Sigyn, his loyal wife, could do nothing but weep as the stones split and the bindings snapped. Loki rose, scarred and furious, his laughter wild and cold as he strode out from the underworld into the fading light of a dying world. The earth shuddered again as his monstrous children stirred in their prisons. From the depths of the sea, Jarmungandr uncoiled, its vast body churning the oceans into tidal waves that swallowed coasts and drowned entire lands. The serpent's breath filled the sky with venomous mist, blotting out the sun and moon, whose light had already begun to fail. From his icy chains, Fenrir broke free with a roar that shook the heavens, his jaws stretching wide enough to swallow the sky itself. His steps scorched the ground, each footprint a wound upon the earth. And in the land of fire, Muspelheim Surtur rose from his burning halls, his sword blazing brighter than any star, his armies of flame marching behind him toward the realm of the gods. The frost giants awoke in Jotunheim, their horns echoing through the frozen valleys as they gathered to follow Loki's call. Even Hell's gates opened, releasing the legions of the dead who had waited in silence for this day. Across the realms, the signs multiplied, rivers boiled, mountains split, and the stars themselves began to fall like burning embers from the sky. The wolves Skull and Haughty caught their prey at last, devouring the sun and moon, plunging all creation into darkness. Mankind fought and perished in endless war, brother against brother, father against son, as the prophecy foretold. And as Loki stood upon the plain of Vigrid, where the final battle would be fought, he lifted his arms to the heavens and smiled through the scars. His vengeance was complete, but the price was total. Even he, the trickster who had defied gods and fate alike, could not escape what was to come next, the end that devours all things. Even the bringer of chaos himself. The plain of Vigrid stretched endlessly, a vast wasteland where the last battle would decide the fate of gods, giants, and men alike. The sky above it churned with ash and fire, and the sound of distant thunder was not of storms, but of armies moving toward their doom. From every realm the combatants converged. Loki, now free and vengeful, marched at the head of the giants and the dead, his eyes burning with fury and madness. Behind him came Hell's legions, shadows in armor, their hollow eyes gleaming faintly beneath their helmets, their weapons forged in the cold forges of the underworld. From the east came the ships of Naglfar, made from the nails of the dead, cutting through the poisoned sea with Loki as its captain, steering toward vengeance. To the south, the horizon blazed as Surtur and his fire giants advanced, their molten weapons dripping flame that scorched the air itself. Each step they took left trails of molten stone, and their march was a river of heat flowing into the cold heart of the world. Across the shattered Bifrost Bridge, the gods readied themselves. Odin stood at the head of the Aesir, his single eye reflecting the doom he had foreseen. Upon his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, he bore the spear, Gungnir, whispering runes of fate into its tip. Thor stood beside him, his hammer Mjolnir glowing faintly like captured lightning, his face set with grim determination. Freya came armed with an antler in place of his lost sword, knowing his fate was sealed but stepping forward nonetheless. Heimdall, guardian of the Rainbow Bridge, raised the Jollahorn, its low, haunting call echoing across all 9 worlds. It was the sound that ended the ages, summoning every being to their final reckoning. The gods of Asgard stood not as rulers now, but as warriors, facing the end of all they had built. They knew that this was not victory they were marching toward, but remembrance of final stand that would echo through whatever came after. And as the armies closed in, the sky split apart, releasing a storm of fire and frost that turned day to night. The plain of Vigrid trembled beneath the weight of destiny, and even Yggdrasil shuddered in pain. The air itself seemed to whisper the names of those who would fall. For the prophecy of Ragnarok was not a tale to be averted, was the heartbeat of the cosmos coming to its inevitable close. The moment Heimdall's horn fell silent, the world erupted into chaos. Fire and ice collided on the plain of Vigrid, and the roar of countless armies filled the air like thunder. Odin charged first, his spear Gungnir gleaming with the light of ancient runes as he rode Sleipnir into the heart of the enemy. Across from him, Fenrir leapt forward, his monstrous jaws gaping wide enough to swallow the sky. The two forces met in a clash that shook all realms, the Allfather against the wolf born of betrayal. Gungnir struck deep, but Fenrir's fangs closed around Odin, devouring him in one final, terrible act. Thor saw his father fall and cried out in fury, driving himself into battle against Jormungandr, the serpent who had waited for this moment since the beginning. Each swing of Mjolnir cracked the heavens. Lightning split the darkness as the sea serpent coiled and struck, venom spilling from its fangs. Thor fought with all the might of his divine blood, and at last he crushed the serpent's skull, ending its endless encirclement of the world. Yet as he stepped back, the poison coursed through his veins, and he fell to his knees, breathing his last beside the monster he had slain. Freya met Surtur in single combat, his antler weapon flashing against the flame giant's blazing sword. The ground melted beneath their feet, and the air shimmered with unbearable heat. Though Freya fought bravely, without his sacred sword he could not prevail, and Surtur's blade struck him down, splitting the very earth as it did. Heimdall and Loki found each other amid the carnage, the guardian and the betrayer, locked in a duel that would end them both. They fought like reflections, light and shadow, order and chaos, and, when at last they fell, each struck the other dead. Around them, gods and giants perished alike, the ground soaked with divine blood, the sky collapsing under the weight of their fury. The flames of Muspelheim spread across the battlefield, devouring the forests and mountains, reaching even to Asgard itself. Yggdrasil groaned as its roots burned, its branches catching fire, its leaves falling like embers through the smoke-filled sky. The seas boiled, the stars vanished, and the very air turned to ash. In that terrible silence after the final cry, all that had been the gods, the giants, the men of Midgard was consumed. The great cycle of creation and destruction had reached its destined end, and the world fell into darkness. When the last echo of battle faded, there was nothing left but fire. Surtur, standing amidst the ruins of Vigrid, lifted his flaming sword high, and with one final stroke he unleashed the inferno that devoured everything. The blaze spread across the 9 realms, consuming sky, sea, and soil alike. The great tree, Yggdrasil, trembled, its branches catching fire, its roots writhing as if in agony. The river that once nourished it boiled to steam, and the creatures that dwelled within the worlds it held screamed as their homes turned to cinder. Asgard, the golden realm, fell first, its shining halls melting beneath the weight of flame. Valhalla, the home of warriors, crumbled into embers, its walls glowing briefly before collapsing into the void. Midgard followed, the lands of men swallowed by fire and flood. The mountains split open, spilling molten rivers, and the seas rose in furious waves, only to evaporate into clouds of smoke. Even Hell's cold realm was not spared. The frost turned to steam, and the souls of the dead drifted upward, vanishing into the blaze. The sound was not merely destruction, it was transformation. Every roar of fire, every crash of collapsing stone, echoed like the heartbeat of a dying universe. Yet within that destruction, there was a strange order, a pattern to the chaos, as if the world itself remembered the cycle of death and rebirth. The gods who had fallen now lay scattered, their once mighty forms turned to ash. Odin's spear melted into the soil, Thor's hammer lay buried beneath flame, Freya's antler cracked and burned. The stars, those eternal sentinels, flickered and went dark one by one until only blackness remained. And yet, even in that void, something stirred, deep beneath the ash and ruin. To humans, elfin Lithrasa had taken refuge in the trunk of Yggdrasil, nourished by its dew. They slept as the world burned, untouched by flame, waiting for silence to return. The fire raged on, endless and devouring, until nothing remained but the faint hum of the void. Then, slowly, the flames began to fade, their fury spent. Smoke drifted upward, curling into the empty sky where no sun or moon remained. From the ashes of all that was, a single ember glowed, faint but alive, a promise that even the end of the gods was not the end of everything.